Hello and welcome back to Israel with Aline. Today we are at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem to see with our own eyes the 5 most important archaeological finds related to Jesus. And we will see how archaeology helps us to prove the historical truth, the historicity of the Bible. So if you are ready, let's get started. The first thing we see when we enter the Israel Museum is this fabulous model of the city of Jerusalem. It shows exactly what Jerusalem looked like in the year 66 AD. Why exactly that year? Because it's when Jerusalem reaches its peak, just a little before the beginning of the destruction. So this city, as we see, is the city of Jerusalem as Jesus knew it. For example, we see here next to us this building with red roofs. This is the Pool of Bethesda, also known as the Sheep Pool, the place where Jesus performed a great miracle where he heals the paralytic during the Sabbath. A much more terrible story than this happened inside the Antonia fortress, this fortress with 4 large towers. That is the place where Pontius Pilate judges and condemns Jesus to death and the start of the Via Dolorosa. What is the place in Jerusalem that Jesus visited most often? He is right here by our side too. We see here the Temple of Jerusalem, which we are going to talk a lot about today and also a lot next Sunday. Here we see the Temple of Jerusalem where Jesus used to preach, and he came here from his childhood until his last days. And here in this model we see this door, which is the Golden Gate, where Jesus entered on Palm Sunday during his triumphant entry. And I want to show you another place that is down here. Let's go. Here we see the Pool of Siloam, where Jesus performed another great miracle, the healing of the man born blind. These places that I just mentioned and many more we have already filmed here on the channel, but the most important archaeological findings in all of Israel, including those related to Jesus, were brought to this museum where we are going to enter now. The Israel Museum was founded 60 years ago, and it's like several museums within one. There's an ancient art department, modern art, Jewish history, an entire museum just for children, departments of Asia, Africa, and Americas, and of course, the archaeology part. We've now arrived at the archaeology department, and the first thing we come across here are these anthropomorphic sarcophagi. That is, they are sarcophagi with human images, and they are nothing more, nothing less than 3,400 years old. That is, we are talking about the very beginnings of the Bible, but today we came here to seek archaeology related to Jesus. And so we now have to follow the timeline, walk through the museum, and seek the Roman period of the land of Israel. This is because the museum is organized chronologically from the oldest to the newest. For example, this part that we are walking through now is from the time of the patriarch Abraham. On the way, we are passing by the period of 3,000 years ago. The archaeological findings that are here, they are connected with King David and King Solomon. And since Jesus is from the lineage of King David, as the Bible itself tells us, I wanted to make a small stop here to show you some things. First are these columns that are up here. They were found in archaeological excavations, and it is believed that they were part of royal buildings, colossal buildings built by King David himself or by King Solomon. But the most important thing is right here next to us. Until the 1970s, most of the world's archaeologists believe that King David didn't really exist. Does that mean he wasn't a person, but rather a legend created later by the people of Israel? In 1993, everything changes when Gillicook and Abraham discover this stone, the Stele of David. The Stele of David, it talks about King David and his lineage, in Hebrew, Beit David. That is, this stone and the other archaeological finds that are in this room, they managed to convince most of the archaeologists in the world that the Bible really tells the truth about King David and also King Solomon. So we are seeing how much biblical archaeology in Israel is changing many people's view of the Bible. Everything we see now around us is from the time of Jesus, and we know that the place he visited the most here in the city was precisely the Jerusalem temple. The first time he is taken to the temple, he was only 40 days old when his parents presented him at the temple. After the days of their purification according to the law of Moses, they brought the boy to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every firstborn will be consecrated to the Lord. And they also went to offer a sacrifice according to what is written in the said law, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Jesus also goes to the Jerusalem temple with his family when he was 12 years old. And he stays behind, and after a few days when the family returns, they find him still inside the temple, but sitting discussing with the wise men of the law, and everyone amazed at the amount of knowledge that boy had. And that's why here we are going to talk about the 5 most important archaeological findings related to Jesus. We are going to start now with number 5, with the findings of the Jerusalem temple itself, which are right here next to us. These 2 stones that we see here at the end, they are original true parts of the second Jerusalem temple. And I want to show you this one in particular. Think, folks, these stones are part of the same temple that Jesus knew. And on this stone is written Lebet Kaya, the place of the trumpet blast. Because this stone was the upper corner of the Jerusalem temple, and next to this stone is where the Levites would stand to play the trumpets. And in the temple courtyard between the columns is where Jesus used to teach. And here outside we can also see an original column from the second temple. Jesus taught every day in the temple, but at night he would leave and stay on the mount called the Mount of Olives. And all the people would get up early to meet him in the temple to hear him. And there's a good chance that this column witnessed one of these teachings. In Matthew 17, it is written that the tax collectors go to Peter, and they want to collect taxes from Peter and Jesus. What tax? The temple tax. At that time, every man of the people of Israel from the age of 20 was required to give an annual contribution equivalent to half a shekel. When Jesus and the disciples arrived in Capernaum, those who collected the drachma tax approached Peter and asked, "Doesn't your master pay the drachmas?" Peter replied, "Of course he pays." As Peter was entering the house, Jesus spoke up first, saying, "Simon, what do you think? From whom do the kings of the earth collect taxes or tributes? From their own children or from strangers?" When Peter answered, "From strangers," Jesus said to him, "Then the children are exempt. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the sea, cast a hook, and pull in the first fish that bites. When you open the fish's mouth, you will find a coin. Take this coin and give it to the collectors to pay my tax and yours." Is it precisely this coin that Peter takes from the fish's mouth that will be used to pay the temple tax? And what we see here in the museum are precisely original coins used to pay the temple tax in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. The next archaeological finds will really shock you. Fourth on our list is the sarcophagus of King Herod the Great, the king who ruled over all of Judea when Jesus was born and ordered the killing of Jesus and all children up to 2 years old in the city of Bethlehem and its surroundings. We can see that this sarcophagus, when it was found all broken, and it was reassembled by archaeologists, and the missing parts, like here, for example, were filled in. The question is, why was this sarcophagus found in such a deteriorated state? King Herod was not loved either in life or after his death. When he dies, a few years later, Jewish rebels go to the mausoleum that Herod had built, and with tools they break the sarcophagus in a way to try to erase the memory of this king who was so terrible for Israel. This sarcophagus was found in 2007 by the archaeologist Yud Netzer. Yud Netzer dedicated his life to seeking the archaeology of King Herod. For over 20 years, he searched for the tomb and mausoleum of Herod. And after more than 20 years of searching in Herodium near Jerusalem, he finally finds it. So we can see here that the sarcophagus and parts of the mausoleum were brought here. But Yud Netzer, after more than 20 years of searching, he finally finds it. But not long after, he has an accident. A wooden beam that was supporting part of the excavation falls, and along with it falls Yud Netzer. He falls into the remains of King Herod's mausoleum, and he will also pass away. So a story that starts in such a tragic way with Herod, the tragedy follows him and his tomb to this day. We now talk about King Herod the Great and the time of Jesus' birth, but now we are going to talk about archaeological findings related to his last week of life. Here by our side, in the third place on our list, is the ossuary of Caiaphas, the high priest and the one who arrests Jesus early in the morning in Gethsemane and keeps Jesus imprisoned all night, and in the morning hands him over to Pontius Pilate. I want to explain to you how this tomb works. We can understand that a whole person could not be put in here. At that time, there was more than one way to be buried. One way is to put the whole person inside the sarcophagus, which was a more common practice among pagans. And that's also how Herod was buried. Another practice was to simply put the person into the ground and cover them up, placing a stone on top to mark the spot. But a practice that also existed in Jerusalem and throughout the region in Jesus' time was to take the person, put them inside a cave, close the entrance to the cave, and wait a year. After that year had passed, they would collect what was left of the person, which were only the bones, and they would put the bones into an ossuary. And that's exactly what was done with Caiaphas. He was buried in a cave, and the bones were collected and placed inside this ossuary. And we are sure it's his precisely because of the inscriptions that are here on the sides. Many of you may already be familiar with this practice, this type of tomb, precisely because of what is written in the Gospels. Jesus, he is wrapped in shrouds, and his body is placed inside a cave, and the cave is closed. The difference with Caiaphas is that his body really stayed there, and the bones were placed in this ossuary. And the cave where Jesus was placed, which originally belonged to Joseph of Arimathea, was found empty on the third day, on Sunday. But let's continue here in archaeology. We see here folks, Caiaphas, and Caiaphas hands Jesus over to whom? To Pontius Pilate. And here beside us we see the stone of Pontius Pilate. It was found in Caesarea Maritima, the city where he lived most of the time he ruled over Judea. And see what is written on this stone. Does this mean that the Tiberium was built by Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea? Does this mean this is the second most important archaeological find related to Jesus? Does this undoubtedly prove the existence of Pontius Pilate, and more than that he ruled Judea in the time of Tiberius and also in the time of Jesus? Pontius and Pilate inaugurate buildings called Tiberium, and we don't know what it is. But we also really don't care. What matters to know is that this man who made this stone here, this inscription, is the same one who condemns Jesus to death by crucifixion. And as crucifixion was done in the Roman period, most of the time people were tied to the cross. We had no archaeological evidence anywhere in the world that could show that crucifixion was done through nails. So on one hand, there was the biblical account that clearly states that Jesus was nailed to the cross. And on the other hand, we had no archaeological evidence. And therefore, many archaeologists around the world doubted that the crucifixion really happened as it is in the Gospels. But everything changed with our first archaeological find, and number one on our list is the ossuary and the foot of Yohanan ben Haggakol. We have no idea who he was. And he is one of many ossuaries found here throughout the land of Israel. But he is different from all the others for one reason, because when the archaeologists found and opened the ossuary, they found the skeleton of that man. But look at what was found on his heel. Here we see the heel, and the heel is pierced by a nail. This man suffered a terrible death at the hands of the Romans. He was crucified, but he was crucified with the use of nails. So we have the man who died in a terrible way at the same time as Jesus. This is irrefutable proof of the existence of crucifixion by nails. This once again changes the archaeologist's view of the gospel accounts. And what I can tell you that is very cool is that this was the first archaeological proof, and not many years ago, a second archaeological proof of crucifixion using nails was found. But this second time it was found in Rome itself, in Italy. Psalm 102 is written, because your servants love even the stones of Zion and have compassion for its dust. We have love for the stones and even for the dust of the land of Israel. Israel is living biblical history to this day. And despite many people around the world, sometimes even archaeologists, doubting the historical accuracy of the Bible, We can see here at the Israel Museum and in so many locations here in archaeological parks and museums, precisely the stones, the dust, and all these findings proving the biblical stories. Every day, archaeological excavations continue to be made in Israel. At this moment that you are watching this video, there are dozens of active archaeological excavations in Israel from north to south, and many things continue to be revealed here daily. And who knows, in the near future, we will be able to make a second part about this video and show even more archaeological findings about Jesus and the entire biblical history. Today we saw from the birth of Jesus a sarcophagus of King Herod. Much of Jesus' ministry that happens in the Temple of Jerusalem. We saw these terrible people also connected with his death, like Caiaphas and Pontius Pilate. We also saw here a small proof of his suffering on the cross when we saw another person who was also crucified from birth to the death of Jesus, and even his empty tomb. Here, archaeology helps us understand the Bible more. So don't forget to come to the Israel Museum on your next visit to the Holy Land. And if you want, you are also invited to come with one of our caravans, Israel with Aline. I will leave the link and also the QR code here on the screen. That's all for today, folks. So a big kiss and see you next time.